This is the final session. I have to say, one I've been massively looking forward to because education, entirely predictably, has been an absolute core theme through the day. The importance of it to all that we've been discussing in terms of social connection, social capital, and social innovation. And there are not two better people in the country to discuss it than our two panelists on the stage with me now, Peter Hyman, Lucy Heller. I will not introduce them because they can tell their story about them much better than I can tell their story about them. I'm going to pass the floor to them and then I'm going to go to the audience really early on so it becomes a genuine conversation in the room about whether education and how we change it to make good on all the things we've been discussing today. And Peter, can I start with you? Welcome both. By the way, round of applause for our panel. I did a pre-applause.
Good. Well, it's lovely to be here. Lovely to see you all. And I've been here all day. It's been a fantastic day of insights and ideas. So thank you very much for that, Andy, and your team. So I'll do the biog bit very quickly just to put me in context. I worked for Tony Blair for nearly 10 years as a speechwriter and a strategist. I then left and immediately became a teaching assistant and was hopelessly out of my depth in a tough inner city school. I trained as a history teacher, then became a head teacher, setting up a school in East London, a 4 to 18 school called School 21. And then set up a group of schools, and we called the umbrella organisation Big Education. And then founded a charity, Voice 21, that deals in speaking skills and oracy, which is working in more than 1,000 schools across the country. And I want to come back to oracy in a second, which I think is increasingly important. Then I went back into politics. The last 2 years before the election, I was working for Keir Starmer and helped devise the missions, so mission-led government. And since the election, I've been working on a project on how we counter far-right populism. I have not got the answers yet, but I've been going round sixth forms all around the country as part of the project, talking to young people about their views of democracy and social media and gender and lots of other things. So that's been absolutely fascinating, and hopefully I can draw on a bit of that in this conversation. My overall argument on education is that there's never been a bigger mismatch between what we teach in schools and what you need to not just survive but thrive in this very complex world. Some of what's done in school is done very well. There'll be sort of non-negotiable elements like the basics of learning how to read and write and be very good at maths are absolutely essential as the foundation for everything. But then there is just too much narrowness in schools. The exam factory means that it's very hard to do anything other in the curriculum. There's no non-examing curriculum anymore, particularly in secondary school. Everything is feeding towards a set of exams. So young people feel they're on a set of hurdles, 16 and 18, and then a degree. And increasingly when they come out, they realize that it's all been slightly weird and not actually what they needed. One fact is really important. 1 in 6, it's almost now 1 in 5 employers don't even look at the qualifications. So that the game everyone's playing is increasingly not even being recognized by employers because they say it's no longer a proxy for anything we're actually looking for, which is problem solving, creativity, collaboration, communication. So we've got to change fundamentally what's done in school. And of course, we've got a juggernaut coming towards us, which is AI. And schools are understandably not even at the foothills of realizing, other than probably deciding to ban it so that people don't cheat, which is, of course, the answer to most things we decide to do with technology in schools. You just ban it. Whereas obviously we've got to be able to harness it. The phrase I use a lot is that schools have, in the future, got to be hard tech and hard human, which is a phrase I got from some American entrepreneur. You've got to come away being brilliant at understanding how to navigate technology, and you've got to be doubling down on the human qualities that allow you to do all the things that technology will never do. And schools are neither good at getting you to be a very good human, nor are they good at getting you to be really good with technology. So we're not preparing people in that way for the world they're going to go into. There are some solutions to this that I can come back to in a minute, but that would be my sort of starting argument.
Wonderful. Peter, thank you for setting that out so clearly and compellingly. Lucy.
So I'm Lucy Haller, and I'm the Chief Executive of ARC, which is an education charity that's been going for just over 20 years. And at the heart of it now, we originally set up as a sort of more general children's charity, but have become over the years focused really on education, and largely in this country, although we've done a lot of work internationally. So we have ARC Schools, which is a group of 39 schools across the country, predominantly London, South Coast and Birmingham. We work in areas of high disadvantage. We're trying to make sure that there's great education. But we also, around that, then have built a number of sort of social ventures trying to address some of the problems, not just for our schools, but for the system generally. So we have curriculum programs, now sort of ARC Curriculum Plus, which is in around 1,000 schools around the country. We've done teacher training. The Ambition Institute is one of the ARC offshoots that's doing teacher and leadership training, everything from sort of ed tech to children's social work training. And for anyone here thinking of changing career, Now Teach was one of the organizations that we incubated, which is trying to find people who've had successful careers and want to come in later life into teaching, which has been very successful. So there's a range of those things. In terms of the role of education, I think two things. We have sort of the problem set was, what role can education play in both furthering social cohesion and nurturing social capital? It strikes me that we're in danger of asking both too much and too little of schools. And too much, sometimes it's expected that schools can, on their own, particularly in a period of financial austerity, overcome the class system, which, has sort of deep roots. Inequality is deep-rooted. It's quite a lot to ask of schools that they can sort of overcome that single-handed and dissolve the class system. We're also being increasingly asked to substitute for public services. And you'll see, schools during COVID have ended up taking on large of the sort of mental health burdens. CAMS has virtually disappeared. Huge number of services are simply not providing, and schools are stepping in. Equally, we may be that we're asking too little, only in the sense that I think we waste the opportunity that is in schools as sort of community anchors and community hubs. Schools are places where, on the whole, we hope at least, we have strong relationships, not just with our students, but with parents, with the local community. It's completely crazy that we're not operating and that government doesn't incentivize more public sector working across sectors. We were saying, why isn't, for instance, the NHS making use of Dudden? I went into one of our schools in Croydon, which is an area sort of often largely refugee or sort of recent immigrant intake with sort of two women's refugees side by side, very difficult area. A little girl in reception who at age 4 had no teeth, just black stumps because she'd been fed sugar water. The idea that we're not sort of simply getting dental checkups, it's incredibly difficult these days to get dental checkups. Large proportion of our kids have never been to the dentist because it's so hard to get on an NHS list. Why is the NHS not using us to do 60 kids in a day very efficiently? We've approached them. I understand the reasons why they don't, because they're not incentivized to do it. They have their own sort of performance indicators, but that's the kind of thing that we should be looking at. I will only say I was worried before we came in that Peter and I wouldn't find enough to disagree about. But I think in terms of his views on curriculum, I want to do a defense slightly of sort of existing things. And I think that lots of what we talk a lot about, the needs of 21st century education being entirely different from what's gone before. I'm not sure I genuinely believe that. Sure, there have been changes, but some of the fundamentals still exist. And when you think that there are still roughly a third of children in this country who don't get the kind of basic qualifications. We're not talking about hugely academic expectations, but saying basic numeracy and literacy, which need to be assisted. It may be that employers aren't looking at qualifications, but if you look at what happens to those who don't have qualifications, you see that notably they have a much harder time. Of course, there are the exceptions, but part of what school's about doing is equipping sort of children with those basic skills. And I think some of those have remained much the same and will carry on being so.
Indeed, I said they were non-negotiable. So I think we will possibly agree more than you think,
I'm sure we
which
will,
may not
but-
make but no, I said so. Numeracy. I mean, the absolute foundations. I don't think anyone in education disagrees with that. You need them as a basic. I would add two additional ones as new basics because I think oracy, which is absolutely vital communication skills, and technology and digital skills.
Yep.
So I think everyone, 100%, have to come out of school with reading, writing, maths, digital, and oracy. And I don't know whether we would agree on this, the fundamental problem, as anyone here in education will know, is the comparative judgment of exams means a third have to fail every year. So they're not a mastery set of exams. What we would like is 100% of young people to be able to leave school saying they have mastered the basics of literacy and numeracy, but that is impossible within our system. So to be clear, it's not like a music exam, you can 100% could get grade 3 music, or a driving test where if you've met the standard you can drive. You have to fail in order to a third, in order to the 2/3 to pass. That is an absurd system.
I agree, except Ofqual would say very firmly, no, that's not the case. If it were true that sort of over this cohort, we actually changed it. So if you're saying last year 30% of children didn't deliver the standard, if over time we got to a point where actually at that same standard everybody got through, they say then it would be 100%.
Well, that's not how they market. That's not.
No,
they have to give the certain percentage each year at level 3.
They would say that we'll get too technical, but I agree there's a problem there, but I still think.
But they're not also setting these exams as functional literacy and numeracy. So there's another question about GCSE English, for example, English language. Again, we don't want to get too much in the weeds.
Yeah.
GCSE English language is not actually GCSE English language. It's not a functional literacy test of any kind. So you're not, if you're taking that GCSE, working out whether young people have reached the sort of literacy they need. But where I also agree with you is I think schools are our last hope, if you like. I mean, in terms of what's going on in society, if we don't get schools right as a place where all of these difficult questions can be discussed about the future of democracy, about what's happening online, about all the social media stuff, you know, all the stuff I'm finding in my conversations with these 16 to 18-year-olds. What I'm amazed by, in a way, well, not amazed having been in schools so long, is that there's no space for these in schools. So when I'm going in from outside doing these workshops, there are teachers with their jaws dropping, listening into these conversations because they're never hearing young people talk about these things because they're just being crammed for the A-levels or whatever it is. And I think there's something more important. Because of the onerous nature, which is sort of laudable but is becoming a problem of safeguarding and other things, what the teachers do is close down any comments, particularly from the boys, because they fear they're about to be misogynistic, and we can't have that in our schools, and our duty is to protect the girls. Whereas in my view, you want the girls to be in the conversation, saying it's not acceptable and having an open debate and actually wrestling with these ideas without shutting them down. So there are real problems, and obviously if you're not countering polarization and lots of other things in schools, then they'll just be in their echo chambers online. So schools are our last hope of creating a next generation who can be more tolerant, more accepting of different points of view.
I don't think I quite recognise the schools that you're going to where those conversations aren't being had, but I agree that we do end up, we've sort of pushed too far on the sort of exam factory piece. And some of that's the responsibility of schools, and it's in the same way that Ofsted has become the sort of bogeyman and spent 20 years saying to our sort of principals, you know, Ofsted is a constraint and not a goal. We don't run schools for Ofsted. We run schools for our students, and we need to remember that. We know the schools we think, you know, better than Ofsted can coming in for 2 days. but it's still really difficult. Even some of our most experienced heads who've only ever had, outstanding ratings, go white at the prospect of Ofsted, and it feels now like to be it's a potentially career-ending experience, 2 days that make the difference. So I think one of the things is saying, no, the profession has to liberate itself partly from this piece and say, that's not what it's about. And I think there are interesting discussions underway that may change some of that. But we do have an over-examined, over-pressurized sort of student life, I think, that we need to think about how we can do better on that. And it's certainly the case that a kind of busy curriculum and exam pressure tends to crowd out things.
Yeah, and if, whenever I've asked teachers or parents or head teachers what they think the purpose of education is, they say it's the maximising of potential. And when I ask them whether they think that's what education does at the moment, they say not at all. So the number of young people who, when you ask them when they leave school, well, was school the place where you found out what you were good at, or found out what you really cared about, or found out all the things that, make you who you are, a sense of identity? Most say no. What the best will say is, but I got my 7 A stars or whatever. I got the right bit of paper. I got the right numbers and letters. And you meet lots of people in their 20s, 30s as well, saying, did school get the most out of you? And it doesn't, and they say they haven't. So that's what's got to change. We've got to have we need to be seeing human beings as three-dimensional, not one-dimensional, and school has got to be looking at the rounded individual, and that gets into all the mental health questions, gets into all the sort of different types of character development in terms of the sort of resilience that you need in life, and it sort of gets into the creativity and the ability to problem solve and think laterally. Something that's dominated by exams, basically schools, you leave your initiative, you park it at the school gates, and when you come into school,
come on, Keith, you don't think this is true of School 21, the school that you
started?
No,
but I tried not. No, I tried not to, but I would still say the constraints on us. So we were seen as a very innovative school, and you've got some very innovative schools. We think on the margins, but most of what we did, particularly as you got to exam years, was to prepare people for exams.
Yeah, but
and it's not even the love of the subject. Even if you were in the silos of we can debate whether you need the sort of single silos of each knowledge. Even within that, you're not becoming a scientist. You are, the thing I love quoting, if you do triple science, biology, physics, and chemistry, you're learning 1,000 pages of textbook in 2 years. Okay? You can't see the wood for the trees. You're not learning the concepts of science. You're learning science as 1,000 pages of facts. Okay, you don't come out with deep understanding, even within the world of science. So that's got to change.
Yeah, I think you may be asking there's lots on which we agree. I still think you're caricaturing other schools, saying, yeah, we're all working with, there's still a lot to be done. I mean, part of the business is that not all learning is fun. Lots of learning is grind. To master anything involves some degree of sort of engagement with things that are hard and difficult, and even rote learning is definitely part of that. So I think there's some element that's not all going to be fun, and I think most schools wouldn't recognise. We're imperfect, hugely imperfect, so I agree there's lots of boredom.
But this is the bit I really disagree with, because people rush to the idea that someone like me, because they want a school that's more expansive, wants fun. And then it's a sort of bogeyman fun, which means learning is hard, and then they double down on the defense of very boring schools where students are turned off learning often for good, and they're literally just being talked at the entire time. They're saying, well, that's what learning is. It's very difficult, it's hard, it's whatever.
You're guying my position, at least, because I'm not saying that.
I'm not looking for fun in a sort of,
frilly way.
Way. I'm saying it's got to be engaging. It's got to feel like some of it, not all of it. I believe in scholarship. I mean, I taught medieval history, for God's sake. I believe in scholarship and knowledge for its own sake, but some of school has to be relevant and applied learning to real things in the real world, because that gives you a sense, particularly the students we served in our school, and most of you, or all of your students, having agency in your life matters, showing that what you're learning can be applied to something that makes a difference to people, and learning in that way also really matters. So I don't think it's about fun, but it's about something that is more engaging than the current drilling for exams, which turns people off learning.
Very much enjoying this self-policing conversation, actually. If only sharing were always this easy. Can I we note the audience early on, because I know everyone is going to have strongly held views in education, because everyone has, and everyone should.
Question over there already.
I wasn't start that early, actually. 1 second. You'll be first, though. I'll remember you. Don't worry. Just to, there may be a difference of degree, but no denying of a mismatch. Maybe from each of you, I could just take one, in addition to what you've said already, concrete suggestion about what should be done differently, whether fundamentally or in degree, to meet the objectives that you've both set out so clearly. Peter, do you want to kick us off?
Well, there's a review going on of curriculum and assessment at the moment, which the interim report was sort of very tame, and it's got to be more radical. I mean, I would do the process in a different way. I was discussing this with Lucy. I think it should be a more expansive process. It should get into real depth. It should be thinking fundamentally about the purpose of education. I think you'd then end up with a very different assessment system, and you'd end up with a broader curriculum that probably narrowed down what you were assessing and gave more flexibility for schools. I believe there should be regional components. You know, if you like, Andy Burnham, a very successful mayor in Manchester, he's got 200 secondary schools. I think he should be in charge of them. And I think some of the curriculum should be nationally mandated. We've agreed on the basics, for example, have to be absolutely done in every single school. But I think someone like Andy Burnham should be able to tailor it along with lots of other organisations in Manchester and schools as to what is really needed in that area. So that's one concrete example. And then the other one, I just come back to oracy. I think to learn how you speak in a range of settings in a sophisticated way, which is what we were trying to do with Voice 21. We worked with Cambridge on these 4 strands: physical, cognitive, linguistic, social, emotional, the 4 strands of oracy. They are a really good framework for learning in its own right, but for also how you talk. So I think all that sense of how you find your voice and how you communicate well and articulate your ideas and think more deeply through oracy is absolutely fundamental. I think that should be a far higher priority in schools. So those are 2 things.
Very good. Just on the last of those, and again, in the spirit of making this a conversation, disagreement actually, I actually think oracy is nothing like as important as listening well. Speaking well is really easy, because all that really means, I mean, you have to practice and stuff. That's taking stuff in your head and having it come out of your mouth in a broadly coherent way. Enough practice gets you there. But listening's really difficult, because that's about taking what's inside someone else's heads, plural, not singular, and making sense of that. And we're rubbish at listening, and there's no one more rubbish at listening than politicians, actually. They're particularly
No, I totally agree.
So maybe listening should be on the curriculum as well, Peter.
Well, with oracy, and
Yes.
it's obviously often called speaking and listening, to be fair, and with oracy, we do a whole set of things about listening. Let me give you just one, because I think people will find this fun. We've got this thing sometimes with younger students about their 3 M's of listening: macro listening, micro listening, and me listening. Okay? And macro listening is looking for the big picture of what someone's saying. So as you're listening to them, you think, well, what's the overall message? Micro listening is looking for the individual examples, but also kind of what's the underlying, you know, are they looking nervous? Are they trying to do this? Or what's the game that's going on? And then me listening is the thing to watch out for, which is the person, obviously in school it happens very often, where you're just thinking about yourself. That I'm about to ask a question, so I'm not listening to the teacher or whatever, because I'm rehearsing the question so as not to be look a fool in the class or whatever. So you're then not listening. Or you're thinking, what am I going to have for lunch? So we all have our own sort of narrative in our head. But if you've got macro, micro, and me, you start to think about listening in a different way.
Likey. Excellent. Lucy?
Well, I think I'm not going to, on curriculum we agree. I suspect though it's a question of time, that I think curriculum change needs really careful national conversation, needs to have some degree of political consensus so it doesn't become simply a sort of switch back and forth. And I think that at the point when the curriculum review was set up, teachers are feeling fairly exhausted with sort of changes, the political battles, COVID, everything else, and there's not really much appetite for sort of radical change right now in the system. We need to take the time to do it. So I would have put it on a sort of slower burn. In the short term, I'm afraid I would say the thing that would make most difference in schools is a bit more money, and certainly at the very least a bit more certainty about money. That we're in the ridiculous position of running large institutions where we don't know now in mid-May essentially what our budgets are going to be in September. And the sort of resignation date is coming up for teachers. You can't plan because we don't have those certainties. That's no way to run a railroad, and it should just be different. And we would all want more money, and we accept that it's going to be tough. But even being able to say a 3-year planning cycle seems so obviously sensible to say, do that.
Definitely.
And otherwise, I think actually in general terms, certainly in terms of policy, a period of calm. I think we do need a bit of the sort of a vision of the sunlit uplands that might be coming, because there isn't much of that at the moment. Teachers feel been through so long periods of being beaten up about not doing this or that, and I'm not sure that we've yet got that sort of vision piece about what we're trying to do. So,
fantastic. Your moment has come. better be good now, by the way, after all that build-up.
Is that working? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
So my name's Jenny. I'm a teacher by trade, but now I'm responsible for teacher training at a university in the east of England. So like any good teacher, I kind of broadly agree and disagree with Lucy and Peter in equal measure, particularly about oracy. We've always had speaking and listening. I was trained 20 years ago under the literacy hour, and we were taught how to do speaking and listening. Has it been lost over the last few years? Absolutely. And I think there's something about working with new teachers that are entering the profession, which is so energizing and is like an amazing privilege. But we train thousands of teachers every year, and we lose even more every year. The attrition rate for teachers is astonishing. What are we going to do to try and keep expertise in the profession? Because that's what it's about. Confidence, we've talked about this in the free speech debate, confidence with Ofsted, confidence to talk to children about hate speech, confidence to have those difficult conversations about misogyny. That requires expertise, that requires being in your community, being a valued member of your community and relationships with families. But we're losing that. We're losing that expertise every year. And I am working really hard to get new teachers into the profession and say to them, this is a job for life. I'd really appreciate the panel's views on that.
Fantastic. Was worth waiting for. Let's take 2 more questions and then we'll go back. Let's go here, front. Choose. Sorry.
Hi, Andy. I have to slightly disagree with you about the listening. The listening is very, very important. We've got 2 ears, 1 mouth, of course. But I have to say, I was in the city, now I'm teaching English as a second language, that I think we do have a crisis in oracy. It's absolutely vital that our young people speak clearly and articulately. They will disadvantage themselves for life if they're not able to do that, and to recognise, as Peter said, the different registers that they might have to operate in, whether it's in a very sophisticated environment or something that is in a slightly different environment. There's also all kinds of dialects, etc., that we have, say, in London, elsewhere. You've got to be able to cope with all of that and still maintain being articulate. So I just really wanted to make that point. I think oracy is absolutely critical.
Very good, thank you. Yes?
Hi, good evening. Thank you for the very insightful session. My name is Sarjina, and I am an entrepreneur and a PhD researcher in entrepreneurship as well. I had a thought, a question that popped up in my head when Peter narrated his interactions with an American entrepreneur. And you said that there was a takeaway that said, go hard on tech and also go hard on people. I think that's incredibly intriguing because on the surface, one might perceive it to be quite a paradoxical parallel in a way, because when you go hard on tech, in a way you take away from people, and when you go more people, usually it's less tech. So I was wondering, in a pedagogical or a learning environment, how do you strike a balance between the two if you consider them to be contradictory at all?
Fantastic. 3 fantastic observations. Peter, I think first on that last one. Or any of them.
Let's go on the last one. Tech has had a terrible history in schools. Interactive whiteboards, I think, were one of the great disasters of schools when they all came in. And it ended up being death by PowerPoint. And literally, I mean, to this day, there are people, teachers who are still just doing everything through the PowerPoint. Then everyone had a laptop or an iPad and all the rest of it, and that was sort of flavour of the month. But most people hadn't charged them, or the teachers hadn't been trained, so they actually delayed the lesson. I remember early days as a teacher finding it a complete nightmare. Now everyone wants to ban phones because they're sort of corrupting children. AI, people just think, as I said earlier, it's just sort of cheating. So we're not good at schools at, and IT, the IT GCSE and things along the way has been a basket case. It's been either doing a bit of a spreadsheet, you know, learning how to do Excel, or then everyone had to be a coder. Well, not everyone does have to be a coder, and obviously AI is now doing all the coding. So the whole technology thing in schools has basically been a disaster. I think we've got to sort of step back and do it properly, but the main thing is you've got to just be agile. Young people are going to be in a world where they're just going to, you know, AI's got to be used as a co-pilot, but in an intelligent way of sort of how you work with it, what it's good at, what it isn't good at, what you have to sense check. And I think it's that. Some people now call it sort of media literacy or technology literacy. I think we've got to get good at that. And I think at the same time, we've got to double down on the sort of, on what it is to be human and what we will always, you know, there's a lot of good writing at the moment about what is the stuff that AI will never do in the way that, you know, it's hard to predict totally, but there's some obvious things that we need to do more of in school than we're doing at the moment in terms of problem solving and lateral thinking and creativity and judgment, words like discernment, which are really important, which gets to the depth of the human experience. And I think then there are tensions between the two, but you can see them both separately first and then brought together.
Lucy.
Well, I want to come back on the sort of teacher attrition, because I agree, obviously, and in the sense that the missing piece from what I said earlier was that what we need is more great teachers, and we're seeing too many good people leave the profession. Some of that, I think money is actually sort of secondary, probably, because I think most teachers do it because they love it. Sometimes they get sort of driven out by pay, but it's much more about the sort of twin things of one, wanting a degree of professional autonomy. And I think that, you know, what we're talking about in terms of an exam culture means too often that teachers can feel that they're both being force-fed themselves and force-feeding it down to their students, and the sort of toughness of exam pressures. And I hope in our schools that we get the balance right of providing the support so that they're getting what they need. So great training, sort of great support, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel in every lesson, but also that sort of professional freedom and that real sense of sort of doing something with professional qualities. The other piece is about flexible working, and I'm hugely conscious that in almost every other profession now, there is a degree of flexibility, and we hear continually from young teachers that they're moving just because they want to get out of it. It is really tough. There are very few other places where you get the degree of rigidity. We have kids in school from, you know, kind of 8:30 to 4. It's hard. There's an expectation. Schools are being asked to deliver something, and I don't see particularly an immediate way around that. But we have to think about how we can work more flexibly. There's a difficulty, and it's something that I don't think actually tech has yet delivered, and we were trying to say the department to major on this, that if somebody could get sort of timetabling to be more flexible than currently it is, anyone from schools will recognize the business that is still kind of 2 weeks, sort of where somebody sits with a hot towel over their head and tries to work out the timetable for the year ahead, and it's very difficult to change. We need that to be more flexible. But those are the things that I think would make a difference. But it's not easy, and it's particularly not easy now when the pressures are, you know, you'll have seen lots of schools going through restructuring at the moment because of the sort of funding gap in terms of next year.
Fantastic. I'll take 3 questions from the left wing to avoid political bias accusations. We'll start at the front here and then...
Thank you so much. I'm Elsa Kent. I work in nature, food and farming education, and I've been absolutely fizzing in this conversation because it's brilliant, and I agree and disagree with a lot of what you said, but fundamentally, when we're talking about the purpose of education, I feel just amazed that there's been no acknowledgement of the fact that our planet faces the most, uncertain future. And when we're talking about the role of education, how have you not mentioned the fact that we need to be equipping students to know how to live on a living Earth, how to care for that living planet that we all share? I feel very emotional even bringing this up. We need to be talking about this. That's a fundamental, when we talk about literacy, numeracy, oracy, we are human beings on a living Earth. How is that not part of those core elements?
Excellent challenge. Let's just pass this maybe back there, and then we'll come here.
Thank you. I don't quite know how to follow that one, but I've taught in 3 countries, and I have worked with teachers, head teachers. I've worked with people in university, right across the whole kindergarten, very important. And it seems to me that most of the time you're talking about secondary education and exams. Now, where you kill a child's confidence and their love of learning is in the primary school, or maybe even in kindergarten.
Right.
And for my sins, back in '86, we devised a national curriculum. We worked on the literacy hour, which I'm furious about. And the very first article I wrote in this country was called Finding a Voice. And there is nothing like the moment when you work with an individual and suddenly there's a look on their face, their eyes light up, and you know you've recognized. And I've interviewed people who've said, there was this teacher and I was seen. So there needs to be more teachers, more respect and more time to connect with individuals at early ages, because that's when the damage is done.
Fantastic. We go here. And then, yeah.
Hi. Neurodiversity, surprised that's not been mentioned yet. I'm an ex-teacher, I'm a school reader, I'm a psychotherapist. Some of our brightest people are neurodiverse, and that's a huge burden for schools to have to cope with for teachers. So what are your views on that?
Fantastic. And if you can both be as terse as possible, try and fit in 3 more questions after this. Peter.
I agree on the planet, and one of the ways of doing this is a lot of these issues don't fit into the silos of our subjects that still dominate everything. So I think there are 1 or 2 schools at the moment piloting interdisciplinary learning, which is obviously how the real world works and how universities are doing far more courses that are that way. So to have a climate one, there's one, St Paul's famous public school, for example, is doing this at the moment. There's a proper course with applied learning as well as sort of knowledge-based learning with it. So I'm totally agreeing with you, but I think it is an example of interdisciplinary learning that we need more of. Early years, I totally agree. I think the early years curriculum is actually a better curriculum because it's more holistic. So all of the things you're learning in reception then get watered down as you go up the school. So I totally agree with you. You've got to get the early years right, and and primary is a crucial time. Some people say it's between about the ages of 6 to 12 where you really find out what your passions are if you're directed in the right way, and those I think are still crucial ages. And then neurodiversity is another reason why we've got 2 one-dimensional system, because a lot of neurodiverse young people are put off learning altogether because they're not people who like just being sat in a desk, talked at all day by teachers in a very linear way. So I think, again, a broader, more diverse diet in schools, it would really help with that.
Lucy.
So quickly, sort of yes on that, yes on sort of climate and the earth as your home. The only problem across all these things, as the curriculum review is discovering, is that anytime you start talking about curriculum, there's an endless list of what people want schools to cover, and there's only limited time. I completely agree on primary. It's been sort of a great sort of strength at ARC because we have sort of not just primaries, we have also ARC Start. And one of the problems is that I think successive waves of early years policy has been really focused on childcare for working parents rather than child development. And we're trying to address that. I think we have our primary schools and our nurseries are lovely spaces that we hope do exactly what you're talking about. What I want to see more of, and I think key stage 3 for me, is the great sort of education waiting room at the moment, that it feels like a sort of preparation, and you hear both teachers and students talk of it almost as sort of, I'm working towards this with my GCSEs, and that should be an extension, exactly the point about, 6 to 12. I think it's sort of slightly later. The first years of secondary school should be that real opening up of the world, and we're not using the freedoms that we have, I think, to think interestingly about that. On the neurodiversity, I think this is part of the wider thing about the explosion in kind of special stroke additional needs, and there's lots of discussion obviously going on at that moment. We're now in an impossible position, and I think the 2014 Act kind of is partly responsible. An entirely well-meant policy decision has ended up with this explosion and a kind of atomization, so that parents who, in my days at school, would have fought like tigers to avoid a SEND designation for their child, now see it as part of doing their best by children. We've got an adversarial situation in which, you have to go to battle. Huge amount is being spent on just getting to a diagnosis without being able to offer decent medicine. We've got to completely reverse that, but that's going to be a really difficult thing to do, and it needs both political will and some money, and whether that will come, is going to be...
Remains to be seen. 2 more questions, if they're super sharp as well. And I promised this gentleman, well, I didn't promise you, I just looked at you actually, and let's go, so I can't not do it now. So we'll go here, and who wants to last? Look at this.
Oh, go on.
Choices, what?
Just let them run over.
Yeah, we'll do that. Right. So.
Okay, my name is Ira Zaman. So critical thinking, often mentioned, and compassion. But my question is, how on earth do you instill those skills into education when you've got so much disruption, critical thinking, so much polarization in terms of compassion, and so much speed of change with technology? How on earth do you approach it in that very big context?
Right. Pass that mic. I'm going to do 3 questions. Lucy's persuaded me. This lady here, I think, had a hand up. Here? I hope so.
My name is Leonie McClay, co-founder of a community interest company called Zingera, all about blending real-world and virtual learning, partly inspired by my 18-year-old's journey in and out of school and back into school. He was out of school between the ages of 9 and 16, had 3 months in a special school after first 5 years in regular primary school. His blended learning journey has been transformative, and he's made the very difficult decision yesterday to choose between Cambridge and Imperial College in his application, and it just shows the power of combining technology with real-world learning.
Fantastic, thank you. Congratulations. And last question here.
Okay, I'll try to make it a fun one. On the theme of connected societies, as societies are evolving and becoming more diverse, and the face of the classroom is changing, and we're having more and more students who potentially have a very different lived experiences from their teachers. They're more interconnected with the global world because of the internet and social media, and have more diverse lived experiences and perspectives. How are we equipping our teachers to handle classrooms like that? With students, maybe they are less relating within communities that they may not be a part of. What kind of training are we doing? What tools are we giving teachers to better handle those diverse spaces? And then to some of the points that people were saying earlier, enable those conversations that they have with all the different perspectives that they bring.
3 fantastic observations. I'm going to pass it back, and I'll start with Lucy this time. And Lucy and Peter, answer those 3 questions.
Very swiftly, you're going to tell
Very
me.
swiftly, and with lashings of optimism.
Oh, okay. Well, no, I am an optimist by nature. So I think on critical thinking and compassion, I think it's entirely possible in different ways. So I think critical thinking can definitely be taught, and that's something that sort of runs through the curriculum and how you approach learning. I think compassion is modeled rather than taught, and I think this is about the culture and ethos that schools provide, and you're showing how those things run through. I think congratulations on that. Very nice to have those choices, and I agree, you know, we've got to think about how but schools should be trying to do more. I think the answer will be we need to have that mainstream schools need to deal with most students, and we need to get back to a much more collective view of that. On the connected and less related, again, I'm not sure I really sort of see that. I think that if I look at, so ARC, we train about 250 teachers a year, not just for our network of schools, but for others. And they're a pretty diverse group, and we've gone out of our way to make sure of that. We hope, certainly not true in all cases, that teachers come from the local community or of the local community, and there's a mix. And I don't think there needs to be that identity necessarily between the two. You want to have a mix, and some of what school is about is opening up the world to new things and other things, so it's not a kind of direct identity. I think that teacher training is, and the training that we do, is precisely, I hope, about equipping our teachers to have the tools to be able to have the conversation with anyone, the focus on the individual that's in front of them, and whatever their experience is. Don't pretend it's perfect, but I think we are doing that pretty well.
Lucy, thank you. Peter.
Because we've doubled down on the knowledge-rich curriculum and then didactic teaching, I think, so the answer to all three of these is what we've lost, I think, is the repertoire of teaching. And it answers some of the previous questions as well about what keeps someone in the profession is thinking this is an intellectual, layered, I mean, when I first came in, that's what I thought, sort of complex, it would take you many years to master all these different techniques. So in terms of critical thinking or compassion, I agree with Lucy, critical thinking could be woven into every subject, but there's a set of techniques there. Compassion is both modeled, but there are also techniques, oracy techniques, if you like philosophy for children, which has a good evidence base behind, and a number of people in the room will know about it, where you sit in circles and there are protocols, and then you wrestle with moral dilemmas. Similarly, on the social media and understanding, that's got to be rich discussions that are facilitated in the class to really get underneath what people are thinking and what people are doing online and all the rest of it. And similarly, your real world and virtual blending is a type of repertoire for teachers. It's a sophistication in understanding how you can use technology. And I'm very much an advocate in real world learning and giving young people the chance to apply their knowledge to situations outside of school because it's so empowering. So I think that's what we've got to be promoting.
We should draw things to a close as we're in overtime. Listen, this is a conversation that is sure we'll want to continue. But what an amazing conversation we've had in the room today, full of solutions and full of optimism. And for that, please join me in thanking Peter and thanking Lucy.